Hi there, and welcome to this video on GCSE Biology for the AQA Specification, focusing on variation and evolution, and in particular having a look at evolution. I'm Shumina from StudyMind, where we help you revise GCSE Biology with our helpful video tutorials, tailored to your subject, your specification, and to you. If you're new here, make sure you click the subscribe button. Whilst you are watching, please leave any comments below if you're unsure about anything, and let us know if it's your first time watching our videos so we can send you our free revision materials. We also have helpful timestamps below for each part of the video to help guide you through the specification. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this tutorial on evolution. So in today's tutorial, we are going to be having a look at, just trying to change the slide. We are going to be having a look at natural selection and evolution. We'll also have a look at the stages of natural selection, and then we'll come on to look at what speciation is. So these are our specification points for today. So first of all, let's define evolution. So evolution refers to a change in the alleles in a population of a species. So remember, an allele is just a different form of the same gene, so it's variation within the same gene. So when there's a change between these different versions of the same gene within a population of a species, that's what we refer to as evolution. Now, evolution occurs over many years, thousands, millions, okay? So it's a long, slow process, and it leads to changes in the phenotypes of species over time in order to make them more suitable to their environment. So this increases their chance of survival, and this occurs through a process called natural selection. So natural selection leads to evolution. So, for example, we have a change in alleles over time, so across multiple generations, and eventually there will be a change in a phenotype of the overall population. So, natural selection is a process that leads organisms to be more and more adapted to their surroundings in order to survive for longer and reproduce more. And we refer to it as Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection because it was coined and studied by him. So, the theory of survival of the fittest nicely encompasses natural selection, so it's a really good way to summarise natural selection. Survival of the fittest. So it basically means that the more adapted the organism is to the surroundings, the more likely it is to survive and reproduce. So survival of the fittest, so the organisms that are more adapted are going to be fitter, and that means that they are more likely to survive and therefore go on and find a mate and reproduce to produce successful and healthy offspring. So by survival of the fittest, we're referring to those with the highest chance of reproductive success. So natural selection is basically the process of survival of the fittest, where the fittest are the organisms that are the most adapted to the environment. Okay, so next slide. So an example of this are the deer mice. So these animals migrated to the sandhills in Nebraska and changed colour from dark brown to light brown. Now, they didn't just change colour when they got there, this happened over a period of time, and eventually the population became more of a light brown colour rather than a dark brown colour. And it turns out that this is because this protected them from predators, because they blended better into the sandhills of that setting. Now, why did this happen? Why is it that we started to see a change from having dark brown mice to light brown mice? Well, it's because when these deer mice were introduced to the sandhills of Nebraska and they migrated there, there's variation within their population. Now, remember from the last tutorial, we refer to this as intra-specific variation, so variation within the same species. So some mice might have been a lighter brown colour, some mice a darker brown colour. Just how within the human population we have different skin colours too, so same kind of thing. Now that they've moved to this new environment where there are predators amongst the sandhills, the lighter mice survived for longer because they were more camouflaged into the sand,
whereas the darker mice stood out more and therefore predators were more likely to find them and eat them. So, the lighter mice had this adaptation that allowed them to survive for longer than the dark brown mice, and therefore allowed them to reproduce more. So eventually the allele for this light brown colour became more popular within the species. So that's our example of survival of the fittest. So these are our original dark brown deer mice. Deer mice changed colour to light brown to be protected from predators. Lighter brown mice survived longer, therefore over time the allele for this phenotype became more common. So, Charles Darwin wrote a book called On the Origin of Species in the 1850s, in which he attempted to describe evolution and how it works. So one of the most important principles coming from this is that all species of living things evolved from very simple life forms, and eventually, through evolution, organisms became more and more complex. So evolution is key to the complexity of life. And this process began more than 3 billion years ago, so that's why I said evolution is something that takes place over not a short amount of time, but thousands, millions, and even billions of years. So, to summarise the stages of natural selection, we first of all have variation that exists within the population. So that could be the light brown and the dark brown mice within the deer mice population. Then selection occurs. We then get breeding of beneficial alleles, because those animals that are selected will have those beneficial alleles that allow them to survive in the new environment. So to talk about this in more detail, so variation within the population exists within a species because individuals have different alleles, so different versions of the same genes. Now, alleles of a particular gene can bring advantages or disadvantages to a particular individual within a species. So, for example, we have a little example here with mountain rams. So, one male can have an allele which gives them long horns, and one male can have an allele which gives it short horns. So, different alleles of the same gene. So, if you're asked to talk about natural selection in the exam, this is basically what you have to write. You have to state the theory, and it may well give you an example. So, it may well give you a scenario in which you can then take from that scenario and use examples to support your theory in the same way that we've done here. So try to commit these sentences to memory. Not necessarily rote learn them, but know the details. So variation exists because individuals have different versions of the same genes within a species. So make sure you understand that concept. Now selection occurs. So remember, survival of the fittest is the idea that an individual that has traits which allow it to effectively survive and compete for resources will be able to successfully mate and produce offspring, whereas an unfit individual with poor traits will not be able to successfully mate and produce offspring. So for example, mountain rams with large horns are able to successfully defend themselves and compete with other males for food and water, as well as for female rams, whereas males with shorter horns are unable to do so. So as such, males with short horns are less likely to survive and reproduce, whereas the males with the longer horns are more likely to survive and are able to successfully mate and pass on their genes to their offspring. So here we have survival of the fittest, in which the fitter ones in this scenario are mountain rams with large horns. We then get an expansion of this particular beneficial allele within the population. But why? Now, it's because genes and alleles of genes which are favourable and confer a selective advantage to a species accumulate in their frequency within a population over time. So this is because, for example, with the mountain rams, the one with the larger horns are the ones that are going to reproduce and have their offspring. And it's more likely that they're going to pass down that large horn allele to their offspring. Their offspring will then have large horns. Whereas the small horn rams are not reproducing because they're living for less, for a shorter period of time. Therefore, the short horn allele is going to die out within the population. So we can measure the frequency of the beneficial allele within the population by counting the change in allele frequency within a population over time. So looking at the mountain rams, over time, more and more mountain rams will have larger horns. Now this is over a long period of time, and we call this evolution. So just a few tips coming up. So natural selection relies on there being a selection pressure. So if there is unlimited food, it doesn't matter if some individuals are better at hunting because there is limited selection pressure. So with the mountain rams, perhaps if there's a period in which prey are not as prevalent, maybe during the winter when many animals hibernate, that is an example of a selection pressure because then there's going to be more competition for the same resource, so for food in this case. So natural selection relies on there being a selection pressure because otherwise, if everything is in plentiful supply, there is no pressure on the alleles because both rams with large horns and rams with short horns don't have to compete because there's plentiful supply. But this obviously tends not to be the case in general life. Okay, another tip coming up. So a beneficial characteristic can often arise due to a mutation. So we have a gene, there's a mutation in it, this will lead to a change in genotype, and this may lead to an advantageous phenotype, which then spreads due to natural selection, and therefore we have an expansion of this beneficial characteristic or this advantageous phenotype within the population. Now, as I said, natural selection and evolution happen over several generations. It's not a bam, it's happened. It happens slowly and progressively over time. And finally, natural selection leads to evolution. So over many generations, the population will evolve, so the majority of individuals have this beneficial characteristic. So it's natural selection that allows for the process of evolution. Now let's come on to have a look at speciation. So speciation is the formation of a new species. So species form when the phenotypes of two organisms in the same species gets distinctly different. So there is a key way of working out whether a new species is formed. And we look at this in terms of breeding. So if two organisms can no longer freely interbreed to produce fertile offspring, we say that they belong to different species. So this species definition is really, really important. You need to learn this because it could be a really easy one marker, and then also learn how we then define this new species, and they can no longer freely interbreed to produce fertile offspring. Okay, so these two statements are really important for you to understand. So natural selection itself not only leads to evolution, but also within that it can lead to formation of a new species if there is a split in the population. So for example, geographical isolation can separate two populations of monkeys over two islands. So geographical isolation could be formation of a mountain range or cutting through a valley by a river, for example. So as we'll see on the next slide, so a mutation in one monkey, so for example, a grey monkey can help improve ability to climb trees and reach food. Now, this mutation spreads via natural selection to the other monkeys on the same island, so on the same side. There is a reproductive barrier, however, because these monkeys cannot easily access this population. Now, they're the same species, but they've just been split by this geographical landmark. So, therefore, there's a reproductive barrier, which is this river, which means that these monkeys cannot easily access these monkeys, and therefore there is less breeding between the two. So this mutation does not spread to this side of the island. But over time, the two populations will become so different because this advantageous mutation in this monkey will spread within this population via the process of natural selection under the terms of survival of the fittest. And so this species of monkeys, so not this species, but these organisms, this population, are going to become better adapted at climbing trees, etc. But that characteristic cannot be passed to this side because of this reproductive barrier. So over time, the two populations become so different that they can no longer breed together, which means that two different species are formed, speciation. Now let's have a look at some practice questions. So a few of these statements are either true or false. So if we go through them first, and I'll pause the video, and then you can take some time to try and figure it out for yourself, and then we'll go through the answers. So A, different species can breed to form fertile offspring. B, populations have to be split by geography for speciation to occur. C, evolution is defined as a change in phenotype of a population over time. And D, evolution requires a selection pressure such as limited food. So I'll give you a few minutes here, or why don't you pause the video and restart it when you're ready to go through the answers. Okie dokie, so we'll go through some answers now. So A, different species can breed to form fertile offspring. We know that's false because the whole concept of speciation is that two populations become so different that they form different species because they can no longer interbreed with each other to form fertile offspring. And that's actually a really important point there that I forgot to stress earlier. So remember to include this word fertile offspring. So individuals of the same species breed to form fertile offspring, but individuals of different species cannot do this. B, populations have to be split by geography for speciation to occur. No, this is not an absolute requirement, it's just an example. Evolution is defined as a change in phenotype of a population over time. No, that is not the definition of evolution that we came across earlier. And D, evolution requires a selection pressure such as limited food. Yes, we've seen that we require there to be some type of selection pressure on the phenotypes of the organisms. Now that is all for today. Well done, and I'll see you for the next session.
Thanks for watching this free video from StudyMind. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe to catch our newest videos by clicking below, and leave a comment on a topic you'd like a video on. Click here to watch more videos in our series for GCSE Biology, or visit our website studymind.co.uk for free past paper compilations by topic and specification.